Oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday we got news that Imperial Oil is making plans for how to move product if Line 5 is shut down. It's going to mean more oil moved by train. It's going to be more oil moved by tankers on the Great Lakes. Line 5 is the safest option for meeting the energy needs on both sides of the border. So why doesn't the Prime Minister have a plan to make sure Line 5 keeps operating?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the beginning, we have worked closely with our American counterparts on important issues facing Canadians and people on both sides of the border. That's why we continue to advocate for Line 5. We recognize how important it is to ensure energy security to both Canadians and Americans. Our ambassador in Washington, along with officials on both sides of the border, remain engaged on this important issue. We are very hopeful we're going to be able to solve this issue.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, leadership means the Prime Minister should be engaged. He's had 3 calls with American officials, and he hasn't mentioned Line 5 once. 30,000 jobs will be affected if Line 5 is shut down. According to the Pipe Fitters Union, up to 6,500 good trades union jobs could be affected. These are good jobs for families across Ontario. Why won't the Prime Minister stand up for these families?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Line 5 is a vital source of fuel for homes and businesses on both sides of the border. That is something that we have argued strongly and will continue to argue strongly with members of the U.S. administration. Our ongoing engagement with the Biden administration and with partners in the United States on this and on many issues continues to be on the front burner.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's vaccination rate is the lowest in the G7. The Globe and Mail pointed out this morning that Canada will need to vaccinate 300,000 people per day, or 2.1 million people per week, to meet the September deadline the Prime Minister keeps promising. So far, only 124,000 Canadians have been completely vaccinated. Where is the Prime Minister's plan to vaccinate 2.1 million Canadians per day?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have had a strong plan on procuring vaccines since last spring. We signed more deals with more potential vaccine manufacturers for more doses per capita than any other country, and that is paying off. We're getting shipments of vaccines into Canada. We're delivering them across the provinces and territories who are getting them into arms, and we continue to be on track to receiving the 6 million doses promised by the end of March, 20 million doses in the spring, and we will have all Canadians vaccinated by September if they want one.
The
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Nous avons appris ce matin.
We learned this morning that last March, the CEO of Numax, a pharmaceutical company in Montreal, offered to manufacture vaccines in Montreal. Unfortunately, that proposal was totally ignored by this government. The Prime Minister has to tell Canadians why he didn't negotiate last March to have vaccines produced domestically. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, that's simply not true. Since the beginning of the pandemic, we knew we had to strengthen our domestic vaccine production capacity for now and for the long term. That's why we immediately invested to support projects like Medicago, the National Research Council of Canada, and others. We acted swiftly to boost our domestic production capacity, and we did this by listening to and following the advice of our scientists and experts at every step of the way. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, that's not true. The information on vaccine delivery is coming in drips and drabs. We've just had a week with no deliveries. It's radio silence. The government is asking Canadians to be patient, but Canadians want to know the truth. How many Moderna doses will get here by February 22nd? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I am happy to be able to confirm yet again that we will be getting all the promised deliveries from Moderna and Pfizer by the end of March as scheduled, with doses arriving week after week. Yes, there are fluctuations in vaccine deliveries from week to week, and we will still be able to reach our objectives for the months to come. And in addition, we are still on track to vaccinate everyone who wants to be vaccinated by September. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We knew that Canada didn't produce any vaccines. We knew that Canada would simply rely on a vague assurance coming from Europe. We know that Canada didn't negotiate any delivery guarantees in its procurement contracts. The Prime Minister says everything's hunky-dory because Canada will be producing its own vaccines. However, his own minister reminded us that that won't happen before 2022, or 6 months after the date where they said everyone would be vaccinated. If that's the Prime Minister's strategy to avoid running out of supply, could we at least see the contracts ourselves? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we signed contracts with more vaccine companies than any of our allies for more doses potentially than in any other country, more doses per capita. We knew that it was possible there would be interruptions in vaccine delivery, and that is why we are still confident that we will be able to reach our target by the end of March, and our target to have everyone who wants to be vaccinated by September. We will continue to work with our partners all around the world, like the European Union, to ensure that vaccines continue arriving in Canada. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Well, we'd like to see the contracts, Mr. Speaker. Europe has given vague assurances that even its own members don't condone. The U.S. has placed restrictions on exports. The U.K. is contemplating doing the same, and Canada won't be able to produce anything before 2022. Yesterday, 590 shots were given in Quebec, and at that pace, we will never get through this. We will never reach our targets. When the Prime Minister, in conversations yesterday with the President of the EU, did the Prime Minister negotiate any guarantees over Pfizer's production in Kalamazoo? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. While the Bloc Québécois leader scaremongers, I'd like to reassure everyone that the EU has not put any restrictions on vaccine deliveries to Canada, and that is consistent with what we said when they announced those measures. Yesterday, the minister remains in contact with her European counterparts, and we will continue to work with all our allies to ensure that the supply chain remains open and resilient. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Delays in vaccine deliveries mean that more people will fall ill and more people will die. The lack of clarity coming from the government around vaccine production in Canada will erode public trust. The Prime Minister says we will be able to produce in September. The Minister said by the end of the year. The NDP has always said that we need domestic production. Why didn't the Prime Minister start planning for that a year ago? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Since the beginning, Mr. Speaker, we knew that we needed to strengthen our domestic vaccine production capacity, and that's precisely what we've done. We immediately invested in projects like Medicago and the National Research Council and Accelera, among others. We worked on generating domestic production capacity, while at the same time ensuring that we would be able to secure supplies from abroad. That's why we signed the most contracts for the most doses per capita, more than any other country. That's the plan we're implementing, and it's working because we will be able to vaccinate everyone who wishes to be vaccinated by September.
Delays in the vaccine mean more people will fall sick and more people will lose their lives. But on top of that, the mixed messages and confusing messages from this government around the ability to produce the vaccine in Canada will erode public trust. The Prime Minister said we would be able to have that production capacity by September. His minister said by the end of the year, and the NRC says by 2022. We have long called for, New Democrats have long called for local production of the vaccine. Why didn't the Prime Minister start a year ago to plan to have this capacity here in Canada so we could make the vaccine here in our country?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we did start working on creating biomanufacturing capacity a year ago, which is why we immediately made investments in Medicago, Vito Intervac, the NRC, and Abcelera as we develop domestic vaccine capacity. But at the same time, we signed contracts with companies around the world to ensure that we would be able to get Canadians vaccinated. And despite the fears being peddled by members of the opposition parties, I can reassure Canadians we are very much on track to get the 6 million doses or more planned for the end of Q1 and to have everyone who wants a vaccine vaccinated by September. That's the plan we're working with, and that's what we're delivering.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic has highlighted the lack of funding for provincial health systems across Canada. All provinces have called for increased health transfers. The leader of the official opposition has committed to holding a summit on this issue within the first 100 days of a Conservative mandate. The Prime Minister could do this right away. But all he can do is talk about national standards being imposed on the provinces. Why hasn't he taken action and increased health transfers to the provinces? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't want my honourable colleague to mislead the House. We have had a meeting with the provinces and territories to talk about health transfers, and we all agreed that we need to boost health transfers to the provinces. There's no question about that. And by way of proof, we have transferred billions of additional dollars during this pandemic to help the provinces, including to help seniors in long-term care facilities. We will continue to invest in healthcare systems all across the country. We will be there to be long-term partners in these increases. The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le-Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the Liberals claim they want to boost funding for long-term care, but that funding comes with ridiculous strings attached that add to the burden the provinces are already under. The leader of the official opposition is committed to increasing transfers in a clear, predictable, and unconditional manner. Why does the Prime Minister not trust the provinces to run their own healthcare systems? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, I'm very disappointed with my colleague who calls our concerns about seniors ridiculous. Seniors all across the country would like to be treated as well as anyone else, anywhere else in the country. What the federal government has proposed is to work with the provinces and territories and to ensure that we share best practices so that there's no senior anywhere in the country who says, oh, I wish I lived in a different province because seniors are treated better there. The idea of having high-quality services for all seniors is a responsibility we all share. The Honourable Member for Charlesbourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the Prime Minister said domestic vaccine production would start in September, but the Minister contradicted him, saying more likely by the end of the year. Later on the news, the middle of next year was suggested. At the start of this crisis, the Prime Minister signed a vaccine production agreement with China instead of Canadian companies. Clearly, vaccines could have been produced in Canada. Can the Prime Minister explain to Canadians why he chose Chinese companies over Canadian ones? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. The honourable members in the opposition have repeatedly said things that aren't quite true. What I said in my press conference was that the construction of facilities would occur over the summer, and the industry minister confirmed that production would begin by the end of the year. We will continue to work to accelerate the arrival of vaccines to Canada and with domestic production, but above all by working with our international partners so that we can vaccinate everyone by September. The honourable member for Charlesbourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, are we to understand that those new buildings won't be ready to produce vaccines here until the end of the year, so that won't help with the current pandemic? There was a company in Montreal that said they could produce vaccines quickly, but nobody even called them back when they made the offer, and I'm talking about Nuvax. Can the Prime Minister explain why he didn't negotiate with those companies earlier? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Since the spring, Mr. Speaker, we've been investing in various vaccine producers in Canada. We've created partnerships. We've invested millions based on the best recommendations of our experts in vaccination and public health. We've always followed the advice of our experts, and we are still there to invest in science, research, and protecting Canadians to ensure that everyone can get vaccinated by September of this year. The honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, earlier in question period, the Prime Minister said that there would be fluctuations, that's his word, in vaccine delivery in coming weeks. And that's a big problem because if there are unexpected, quote, fluctuations, it makes it very difficult for the provinces to properly time the 2 doses of the top candidates. So fluctuations are a problem. Can the Prime Minister tell Canadians if he's expecting a reduced or zero shipment from Moderna on the week of February 22nd?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we knew that vaccine production was going to be a massive challenge for companies around the world to develop and produce a vaccine that didn't exist yet when we were signing these contracts last summer. That's why we signed so many different contracts for so many potential doses for Canadians to ensure that we would be able to get Canadians vaccinated regardless of challenges or, yes, fluctuations in the week-to-week delivery program. That's why we can continue to guarantee we will receive those 6 million doses we promised by the end of Q1. We will have everyone vaccinated by September of 2020 who wants one.
Yeah, the honourable member for Calgary-Nose Hill.
Well, if the Prime Minister is admitting that he knew there would be problems with delivery because he depended entirely on signing contracts with other countries for production, maybe he should have had a plan to develop domestic capacity before the end of this year. I think it's really important for the Prime Minister to be clear on this on behalf of the provinces and every public health person who's trying to deliver vaccines. Is he expecting limited or no doses from Moderna to be delivered on the week of February 22nd?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
We are continuing to expect shipments from Moderna this week and in the weeks to come. We will continue to advise the provinces as soon as we get concrete numbers on different deliveries. But yes, they will continue to deliver hundreds of thousands of vaccines across the country. We are on track to receive all the vaccines that we were promised by the end of March. That is 6 million doses from Pfizer and Moderna. And we are very much on track to getting 20 million doses in the spring and everyone who wants it vaccinated by September.
L'honorable député de Beauport.
The honourable member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister promised to get 26 million vaccine doses by the end of June. I tell you, Mr. Speaker, I hope he succeeds. But we're concerned. To do that, Ottawa would have to deliver an average of 1.4 million doses a week. We're way off track. Do you know how many shots were given yesterday in Quebec? 590. Only 590, Mr. Speaker. Can the Prime Minister be transparent and tell people who are making sacrifices what the real situation is? They deserve to know. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I believe I've said this 15 times already in this question period alone. My point is that we will continue to receive doses, 6 million by the end of March. We will get 20 million doses this spring, and all Canadians who want to get vaccinated will be able to do so by the end of September. We have worked very hard to sign enough contracts with various potential producers so that we can ensure Canadians that we are on track to get the necessary vaccines. The Honourable Member for Beauport-Limoilou. Mr. Speaker, I'd really like to believe the Prime Minister when he says we are going to get the promised vaccines on schedule. Everybody wants him to succeed. Everybody wants to get through this pandemic. But so far, it doesn't look like he's having much success. He's failed to get domestic vaccine production up and running quickly, and every week he's failed to get our vaccine orders filled. Can the Prime Minister be transparent with the public? What guarantee can he give Quebecers and Canadians that at least their first dose will get here by the end of June? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I've said, we are right on track to get 6 million doses during Q1 as promised. In the next 2 months, we will get 20 million doses in the spring at the latest, and we will have vaccinated everyone who wants to get vaccinated by September of this year. That is the guarantee we're giving Canadians. We're working very hard right now on that, and I can give my colleague an assurance that we will reach that target.
Plan to phase out the energy sector and move away from manufacturing is looking worse than ever. These naturally physically distanced goods-producing sectors would have thrived even throughout the pandemic. But now, as a result of their absence, we have higher unemployment here in Canada than the US, the UK, Germany, Japan, the G7 average, the European Union, even though all those jurisdictions are struggling with COVID as well. Why is it that workers abroad get paychecks while Canadians just get credit card debts?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, if the member opposite had his way, the credit card debts of Canadians would be monstrous. Instead, we didn't listen to him, and we chose to invest in Canadians right away. We took on debt at the federal level, so provinces and mostly so Canadians, families, and businesses wouldn't have to. We invested to help Canadians through this pandemic with record amounts of supports for families, for seniors, for workers. The members opposite have consistently said we are doing too much too fast. No, we're doing what's necessary for Canadians.
Member for Carleton.
Well, I hate to break to the Prime Minister, but Canadians' credit card debts are monstrous. Under this Prime Minister, household debt for the first time ever exceeded the size of our entire GDP. His own top economic advisor said that his plan will add $1 trillion without improving our economy at all. He has among the highest unemployment in the G7, among the lowest vaccination rates, and at the highest cost. Why is it this Prime Minister can only judge his success by how much he adds to household and national credit card debts rather than how many paychecks he can create?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, through the first 4 years of our government, we created over 1 million jobs for Canadians at the same time as we lifted 1 million Canadians out of poverty. That is what our legacy contrasts with the previous Conservative government. But this Conservative MP for Carleton said consistently at the beginning of the pandemic that we were doing too much for people. We needed to help businesses fit quicker. We shouldn't be so generous with Canadians. Well, he was wrong on that. He's also wrong in his approach that we should be hunkering down and tightening our belts right now through this pandemic. This is a time for the federal government to be there to support Canadians, not just so they can make it through this pandemic, but so our economy will come roaring back stronger and faster afterwards. That is the approach that the world is recommending. Everyone understands that, except the Conservatives.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the U.S. government said Huawei is an espionage arm of the Chinese military and urged Canada not to use their 5G technology. In November, Parliament called on the government to make a decision blocking Huawei's involvement in 5G. Today, Minister Champagne announced 14 NSERC projects for $4.7 million in partnership with, you guessed it, Huawei. Mr. Speaker, why does this government continue to give Canadian tax dollars and intellectual property to Huawei?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians deserve a secure and competitive 5G network. We need to make sure that we're making the right decisions for Canadians, for businesses, to both protect them and keep them playing on the global playing field. That's why we base our decisions on expert recommendations from our top security analysts. That is the work that we've always been doing, and we will continue to do that.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The Prime Minister says making the right decisions. He promised a decision on Huawei 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker. This House expressed its concerns about Huawei back in November, and still the government is announcing partnerships with Huawei, this one for almost $5 million. Canadian telecommunications companies across the country are literally pulling Huawei equipment out of their walls. When will this Prime Minister pull them out of taxpayers' wallets?
Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, no government has invested more in making broadband available for rural Canadians across the country, improving cell service, making those investments that are making a huge difference for Canadians, particularly during this time of pandemic. We will continue to make the right decisions for Canadians, for their security and for their access to telecommunications based on the best recommendations of our experts.
The Honourable Member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Mr. Speaker, the government asked Canadian airlines to cancel flights to vacation spots, but American airlines can still fly to the same destinations. While other countries acted swiftly to help their air sectors, we're now a year into the pandemic and Liberals continue to leave Canadian workers behind. The result? Thousands have lost their jobs and more layoffs are on the way. For months, we've been calling for targeted support tied to keeping workers employed and restarting regional routes like Prince Rupert. We keep hearing talks are happening. Will the Prime Minister act before it's too late and there are no jobs left for workers to return to?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've sent over $1.5 billion to the airline sector to support workers with the wage subsidy through this COVID pandemic. We recognize how difficult this is for the airline sector, for the travel and tourism sector, and that's why we are there to support them and why we continue to work with them. We were very pleased that airlines stepped up to cancel flights to sun destinations at this particular point, and we will continue to work with them to ensure that we have a vibrant and competitive air sector after this pandemic, because boy, oh boy, are Canadians looking forward to traveling once this is done.
The Honourable Member for Victoria.
Mr. Speaker, last week, President Biden followed the EU by issuing an executive order to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies, saying, "I don't think the federal government should give handouts to big oil." But that is exactly what this Liberal government keeps doing, giving handouts to big oil and gas companies. Not only are the Liberals not protecting workers, they're falling behind governments like the US and the EU and failing on climate action. When will this Prime Minister stop dragging his feet? We need to end all fossil fuel subsidies now.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we were pleased to see the U.S. follow in our lead on banning fossil fuel subsidies. We are very much on track for eliminating fossil fuel subsidies in partnership with allies around the world as scheduled. We know that the future needs to be greener and less carbon intensive. At the same time, our commitment to workers across this country, to supporting them, to making sure that they are vibrant solutions in our energy sector for workers to be able to continue to contribute and put food on the table. We need workers in our energy sector to make net zero by 2050, and we're going to work with them as partners on building a better future.
Member for Toronto Centre.
Mr. Speaker, as we mark the 25th celebration of Black History Month in Canada, we honor the legacy and contributions that Black Canadians have made to our country. We do know that anti-Black racism still exists in Canada, and many continue to face discrimination, hate, and a lack of opportunity and resources. Can the Prime Minister please update the House on the steps being taken to address systemic inequalities in Canada?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I want to begin by thanking the member for Toronto Centre for her tremendous work, her advocacy on behalf of the community, and the important question. In the last year, we've taken concrete action to invest in and empower Black communities. This includes launching Canada's first ever Black entrepreneurship program, an action plan around diversity in the public service, and moving forward with our anti-racism strategy. We know that there is much more work to do, including working to address the systemic inequalities in our criminal justice system and fighting systemic discrimination wherever it is in Canada, and we will continue to do that work.
The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, a new BBC report shares the stories of numerous Uyghur women who have been victims of systemic sexual violence in Chinese state-run concentration camps, sexual violence sometimes paired with electrocution. We know that no UN investigators are going to be given access to these torture facilities. The testimony of these women provides more clear evidence of crimes against humanity and genocide. These women have spoken. Does the Prime Minister believe them?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, for years now, we have been advocating directly with Chinese leadership for transparency and better treatment of the Uyghurs in Western China. We will always advocate and stand up for human rights around the world. We are extremely concerned with recent reports of human rights violations in China against members of the Uyghur ethnic minority and other minorities. We need access into Xinjiang for UN investigators and international bodies.
I just want to point out that I believe the Prime Minister's mute button went on. I'm not sure how that happened. Doesn't.
Leave him on mute, Speaker.
Maybe just.
On a matter of order, I would appreciate hearing the rest of the Prime Minister's answer.
He had about 5 seconds left. I'll let him go on. The Prime Minister, if he wants to go and continue for 5 seconds, the end of his answer. That's okay with
Mr.
everyone?
Speaker, we need greater transparency. We need to have international investigators, including from the UN, accessing the Xinjiang province to be able to keep people safe there and everywhere around the world. We will continue our advocacy and protection of these individuals.
Very good. The Honourable Member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, if the Prime Minister is going to wait until the government of China allows independent investigators in to investigate their crimes, these investigations are just never going to happen. The government has a responsibility to listen to this testimony. And we've heard that testimony. And I would submit to the Prime Minister, if he hasn't, please read the BBC report on this. These women are speaking out about systemic sexual violence that they have experienced in contemporary concentration camps. So if we don't call that genocide, Mr. Speaker, then what name would the Prime Minister apply to these crimes?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have been speaking up directly to China's leadership for many years now on our concern of the treatment of women and ethnic minorities in Western China and throughout China. We will continue to stand up for human rights everywhere around the world. We will continue to call for better transparency and understanding of what's happened. We acknowledge that the U.S. has made the determination that these acts constitute a genocide. We will continue our work with them and with other allies to move forward and protect these people.
Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, brave Serena Fleitas told MPs she was 13 when explicit videos got on Pornhub. She pleaded to take them down. One had 400,000 views before it was pulled. With 3.5 billion site views monthly, Serena couldn't escape. Desperate, she even tried suicide. More than 96 million child exploitation pieces are online. The private sector finally acted on MindGeek and got results. But why have the Liberals still done nothing to protect privacy and the ownership of individuals over their own images?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we take extremely seriously this situation, and that's why we continue to work with members of this government and partners in terms of bringing in clear rules for internet service providers and businesses. We need to make sure that nobody is violating our laws, either in the virtual space or in reality. That's why we are looking forward to bringing forward stronger measures in the coming months.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Ethics Committee heard gut-wrenching testimony this week from survivors of online sexual exploitation that the company MindGeek made money off of. So far, all we've gotten from this government is a promise that they'll crack down eventually. Once again, no details, no real plan. The whole House wants to see this end, Mr. Speaker. When is the Prime Minister going to give Canadians a clear plan to protect our most vulnerable online?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, cracking down on illegal online content is something that we take very, very seriously. Whether it's hate speech or terrorism or child exploitation or any other illegal acts, we will ensure that Canada has the tools to go after companies and individuals perpetuating these items, images, or content online. We are working with partners around the world on elimination of hate speech and violent extremist content, as well as exploitation of minors and children.
Honorable député de Pierre-Boucher, les Patriotes.
The Honourable Member for Pierre-Boucher, les Patriotes, Verchères. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 90% of Quebecers want the government to restrict travel, ban travel, until there is a major decrease in COVID cases. 90%, Mr. Speaker. But despite what the Prime Minister claims, non-essential travel still hasn't been forbidden. People can still holiday abroad as long as they buy their tickets from American instead of Canadian companies. 90% of Quebecers are tired of seeing the health of their loved ones compromised by this government of half measures. When will the Prime Minister forbid all non-essential flights? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, from the beginning of this pandemic, we have brought in some of the strictest measures in the world to prevent this virus being transmitted from abroad. We have brought in a mandatory quarantine. We did that as of March. We prevented non-essential travelers from arriving from abroad. We brought in tracing for people coming back to Canada. And we have now canceled travel abroad, and we have brought in tracing measures for when people arrive. And we additionally are having people stay in a hotel, and that is mandatory. We have taken action. And we are working closely, and that is why 98% of transmission is community transmission. The Honourable Member for Avignon-Lamitis, Matane-Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, everyone has heard the Prime Minister tell people to not travel, and everyone has heard him say that we have restrictions. But the problem is that these restrictions are not preventing people from traveling. The problem is that people are still taking vacations abroad. I can confirm that I could leave Montreal and spend break week in Cancun, and the Prime Minister might be shocked at the prices I could get. When will this government forbid all non-essential travel? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Perhaps my honourable colleague will be disappointed to hear that we are currently working with international air companies like Air Mexico to ensure that they too suspend flights from Canada to destinations in the south. We take our decision, or our role rather, in protecting Canadians very seriously, especially with the new variants. So no, my honourable colleague will not be able to travel abroad during break week. She, like all Canadians, must stay here in Canada.
Gregory Midnapore.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said he knows that Canadians are looking forward to traveling again, but at this rate, there won't even be an airline sector. Yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Transport stated that airlines voluntarily gave up their routes to sun destinations when they've been suffering for months without any assistance from this government. Airline workers and unions, they've been good partners. They repatriate Canadians. They continue to deliver medicine, food, and supplies all across this country. Why doesn't the Prime Minister just admit that he continues to make airline sectors pay for his government's incompetence rather than helping them?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
$1.5 billion, Mr. Speaker. That's how much we've sent to the airline sector since the beginning of this pandemic to support workers who are affected by this pandemic. We know that the airline industry has been hit hard. We've been working closely with them for months. We will continue to make sure we're doing everything necessary to keep Canadians safe and to ensure that we have a competitive and prosperous and successful airline industry here in Canada once this pandemic is through. The work with the airline industry continues, is ongoing. We need to make sure that we get through this all together.
Honorable député de Richmond-Arthabasca.
The Honourable Member for Richmond-Arthabasca. Mr. Speaker, I'm listening to the Prime Minister, but here are the real facts. 10th of March, 14th of April, 4th of May, 16th of May, 23rd of September, 18th of October, 23rd of October, 8th of November. Those are all the times that our Prime Minister or one of his ministers mentioned that they were going to help the aviation sector. And what's the result? Nothing has been done yet. Our Prime Minister always seems to be reacting to what's already happened, and he seems unable to take good decisions quickly. When will he repair his mistakes in order to protect our population and support workers in the aviation sector? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. That simply makes no sense, Mr. Speaker. $1.5 billion is the money we have sent to help the air sector, to support travelers who have been struck hard by this pandemic. We will be there to help the air sector just as we have already been. I know that the aerospace industry and the aviation sector will be extremely important in the coming years, and we will be there to support the sector in its success and competitiveness.
Chef de l'opposition.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Would help the tourism sector, small businesses, family-owned enterprises in crisis, a national rollout of rapid testing and vaccination, two things that this Prime Minister's leadership is making Canada 6 months behind other countries on. It's leadership that's required, Mr. Speaker, not his talking points that we've heard today. So his general today couldn't say how many Moderna doses were coming on February 22nd. The provinces need numbers for their plans, Mr. Speaker. So my question is simple. Prime Minister, how many Moderna doses will be delivered on February 22nd?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've been very clear on our continuing confidence in receiving all 6 million Pfizer and Moderna doses by the end of March, and by our ability to vaccinate everyone by the end of September. But at the same time, let me pick up on something the Leader of the Opposition said. He talked about rapid testing and when are we going to roll out rapid testing. As of last October, we rolled out millions of rapid tests to provinces across the country, and I can say that there are a number of provinces who've put those rapid tests to good use. Indeed, testing in businesses, testing in long-term care homes, but there are still millions of those rapid tests not being used by the provinces and territories, and perhaps the Leader of the Opposition could encourage some of his Conservative friends.
L'honorable député de Laval-les-Îles.
The Honourable Member for Laval-les-Îles. Mr. Speaker, we have taken measures to protect and support Canadians since the very beginning of this crisis. We have obtained the largest number of doses of vaccine per capita out of all the countries in the world. And we also have the most diversified portfolio of COVID-19 vaccines. These vaccines are now in Canada, and other deliveries have been confirmed for February and March. Can the Prime Minister give us an overview of our vaccine delivery efforts? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. I'd like to thank the member for Laval-Les-Îles for his question and his hard work. Already, more than 1.1 vaccine doses have been delivered to the provinces and territories. The most vulnerable Canadians, frontline workers, and long-term care residents are receiving these vaccines. And we will be receiving all of our Pfizer and Moderna orders that were planned by the end of March. Millions of Canadians will have received their doses by then, and millions of others will be vaccinated during the spring.
For Foothills.
Dominic Barton was in charge of McKinsey consulting firm who has been accused of unethical business dealings with China and stoking the opioid crisis. McKinsey is now settling dozens of lawsuits over advice it gave opioid makers to boost the sale of OxyContin. Yet the Prime Minister saw fit to appoint Mr. Barton as ambassador to China despite the unprecedented opioid crisis in our country. Before naming him to key positions in Liberal government, did the Prime Minister know of Mr. Barton's role at McKinsey and the firm's involvement in the opioid crisis?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker.
I'm just going to interrupt for a moment. I believe the Right Honourable Prime Minister's mute went off again. We'll get him to get that working, and then we'll let him start right from the top.
My apologies, Mr. Speaker. As I said in the past, Ambassador Barton has demonstrated leadership in advancing Canada's interests, from working hard to bring home Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor to continued engagement on creating opportunities and growth for Canadians. In regards to the opioids epidemic, we're working with the provinces and territories and frontline workers and are moving forward on approval of safe consumption sites. We know that even as we deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, our work on addressing other health issues like the opioids epidemic continues as well.
Honourable Member for Foothills.
How can the Prime Minister possibly defend Mr. Barton? Over the past 4 years, more than 16,000 Canadians have died from opioid overdoses. During that time, Dominic Barton was the global partner for McKinsey, a company that has pled guilty to criminal charges, including bribing doctors and giving rebates for drug overdoses just to boost the sale of OxyContin. Again, before the Prime Minister appointed him ambassador to China, was he informed of Mr. Barton's knowledge of McKinsey's role in advising Purdue Pharma?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, over the past 5 years, we've taken extraordinary steps to fight this opioid epidemic across this country. We've worked with provinces and territories. We've worked with municipalities. We've supported frontline workers. And we've even done what Conservatives continue to resist doing, established safe consumption sites across the country to help people through this opioid epidemic. We're going to continue to put science first and make sure that we're treating addiction as a public health issue and not a criminal issue, unlike what the Conservatives continue to push.
The Honourable Member for Selkirk Interlake Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, troubling allegations have surfaced regarding the former Chief of Defence Staff. The women and men in our Canadian Armed Forces are the best in the world, and they should never be subjected to sexual misconduct of any kind. Canadians, especially those in uniform, expect the highest standards from those in the chain of command. Did any government officials, including the Defence Ombudsman, ever brief the Prime Minister or the Minister of Defence on these allegations against General Vance prior to this week?
Honourable Prime Minister. I believe the Prime Minister is back on mute again. If he can just remove the mute and start over. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every person deserves a safe work environment. Our government has no tolerance for any form of sexual misconduct. When such allegations are brought to the Minister of National Defence's attention, he has always taken them seriously. He has also always ensured that they are reported to appropriate authorities to begin relevant investigations that might be warranted, regardless of rank or position. This is something this government has always taken seriously, and we always will.
The Honourable Member for Don Valley North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents of Don Valley North would agree that increasing Canada's biomanufacturing capacity is an important part of our recovery plan. That is why we move quickly to expand vaccine manufacturing capacity across the country. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, our objective have always been very clear: to provide Canadians with safe and effective vaccines and treatments, and to return our economy and society back to normal. Can the Prime Minister provide us with an update on what we've done to enable domestic vaccine production? Thank you.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
I want to thank the member for Don Valley North for his question. Two companies, Precision Nanosystems and Novavax, are now on track to manufacture vaccines right here in Canada. This is a major step forward to get vaccines made in Canada for Canadians. Pending Health Canada approval, tens of millions of COVID-19 vaccine doses could be made right here at home. We will continue working around the clock to get as many vaccines as we can to Canadians as fast as we can, whether they're domestically sourced or brought in from reliable partners around the world.
Good.
The Honourable Member for Vancouver East.
Housing co-ops whose operating agreements expired prior to April 2016 were left to fend for themselves by the Liberals. Meanwhile, those after the cutoff could receive funding until 2028. After ignoring their cries for help for 5 years, the government finally announced that they have 1 month to apply for up to 1 year of funding. This is not good enough. Using year-end budget slippage to address this critical issue is patchwork, not a strategy. Will the Prime Minister ensure predictable and long-term stable funding for 7,500 low-income families? Yes or no?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, after years of a federal government that pulled back from being involved in housing, we stepped up 5 years ago with a national housing plan worth over $40 billion that has secured housing for Canadians from coast to coast to coast. We will continue to do the work necessary to ensure housing investments in all provinces and territories and all communities continue to move forward. The federal government will continue to be there as a partner to this fundamental need for so many Canadians.